My name is William Fahey. I'm the president of Thomas More College. I usually don't say that, but because of my colleague to my left who made the snarky comment, I don't know if there are any other people subject to authority in this room, but I have to admit, one of the things about the current administration is, I think throughout the United States, there's been a liberation of executives who just read the words, "you're fired," used again and again, and think, that's rather interesting. Don't read anything into that. So, welcome to this evening's talk at the Center for the Restoration of Christian Culture of Thomas More College. It's my pleasure to make a few comments about our evening's speaker. But before I do that, a few comments of a routine nature. So, the most important things first. Underneath the exit sign in the back to the right is the Gilded Age bathroom that has a secret passage. So if you need to use the restroom, washroom, or bathroom, or need to escape via the secret passage, it is beyond the rear exit sign to the right. The next thing that my wife wanted me to say was there are some other great events coming up. There is a bioethics panel that will be held on the 10th of March. That will be here. So contemporary issues in bioethics, a panel discussion with Joseph Meany, who is the past president and senior fellow of the National Catholic Bioethics Center, Matthew Valliere, who is the executive director of the Patient Rights Action Fund, and Timothy Flanagan, who is a doctor, a professor of medicine and health services at Brown University. So that will be held here 7:30 March 10th. Also, the same month, the month of March, Thomas More will be hosting the Revived Catholic Literature Conference. That will not be here, but it will be a great event on Saturday, March 22nd. So this is the Saturday before the Feast of the Annunciation Incarnation. That will be held at St. Marie's Parish in Manchester. There are a series of lectures. It is a full-day event, and I believe you need to register for that. Is that correct? Okay, good. Well, thank you for coming this evening. Tonight we have a very old friend of mine, Dr. John Cuddeback. And I always find it very, very pleasant but very difficult to introduce friends, because I'm trying to compress many things I'd like to say or reveal about my friends into just a few minutes, because I'd rather have you listen to John than listen to me. So John Cuddeback is and has been for many years a professor of philosophy at Christendom College in Front Royal, Virginia. That's where John and I met. I had many happy years there. The majority of our children, certainly our oldest children, grew up together. And John is a graduate of Christendom College, and then went on to study at the Catholic University of America, and also studied for a period of time in Germany. John is a regular speaker. He's one of the best speakers I know, and I'll come around to why that is in a moment. But he speaks regularly on issues of natural law, the common good, Thomism, issues of technology, combination of issues that are pressing upon us because of the different cultural challenges of our time, but issues which have a response that can be given by those who drink deeply from the wells of the Catholic tradition, especially someone like John, who is a student of St. Thomas, a very loyal, careful student of St. Thomas. John is an excellent speaker. I am convinced of this. because of gifts offered to him to which he responded early in his life, that in some respects culminated in a two-part vocation, a vocation to the married life and a vocation to be a Dominican. So John is a third-order Dominican. The Dominicans properly are the order of preachers. And I've always said that when I listen to John, it is self-evident that is not limited to Dominican priests. That is a special charism of all of the faithful sons of St. Dominic. John is an eloquent and enjoyable speaker. I think that you would truly enjoy him. I'm delighted that John is here tonight and that I can just enjoy listening to John and see other people benefit from him. Now, he's taught for, what are we going on, nearly 30 years in the philosophy department, John?
It is 30.
Yeah, and in the last, I can't remember, it must be 10 or more years, John developed, because he has a real apostolate for bringing the riches of his reading and his study to a broad audience. I won't necessarily say a popular audience. By broad audience, I mean all kinds of people, scholars, workers, ordinary people, bringing what he, in the quiet of his life, reads about, thinks about, learns to a broad audience. And that began originally as a simple website and a daily feed I think it was on Thursdays, that bore the title Acorns to Bacon originally, which some of us regret that passed away and is now LifeCraft, which in some respects is more accurate to the largeness of John's vision. John has a regular podcast. I would highly encourage you, I'm sure on the handout there is something about LifeCraft. I would encourage you to sign up to receive the daily feeds, maybe listen to his podcasts that he gives often with his wife. These are beautiful witnesses of the way a Catholic scholar who has an equal vocation to the life of husband and father can bring together what is, I think, wrongly sometimes seen as disparate vocations into one thing. I'm also very happy because today is the feast of Saint Scholastica, a Benedictine, and the liturgical year for me is very providential and it helps explain a lot in life. And I never tire. How can I tire of the gifts that God gives me? God presents me with opportunities regularly. I'm a Benedictine oblate. John is a third-order Dominican. God has presented me with an abundance of opportunities to remind John that St. Thomas was educated by Benedictines, and John will remind me of Thomas's perfection of many of the beautiful rules and insights in St. Benedict. But today is the feast of St. Scholastica, and if you were at Mass or you know the readings from the office today, the readings today actually refer to things that happened 3 days ago. The Benedictines have a very funny feast day that has a name, something like the Feast of the Umbration of Scholastica. And many people know the story of Benedict and Scholastica coming together the last time, they're twins, the last time they come together. And Scholastica wants to be with her brother and just talk about the important things. And Benedict, a man under authority, wants to observe the rule and get back. And she asks, can we not stay and talk about the best things? No. The rule requires that I return. So she puts down her head, and this great thunderstorm comes. Now, this is a feast day, actually, in the Benedictine order, 3 days ago. It's a major feast day. And so it's very nice because my friend John has always reminded me of the beauty and the primacy of talking about the highest things for as long as you can, for as long as you can, for as long as God permits. And so, without further ado, I introduce my old friend, Dr. John Cuddeback.
Thank you, Dr. Fahey. I'm glad you ended with, for talking as long as you can. That prepared everybody for the length of this presentation. So settle in. It's an honor to be here. Thank you very much for coming out. I love the topic that we have before us. They allowed me to choose this topic as a difficult topic. And so I make no pretension to be able to render all these difficult matters clear. However, I hope that my thoughts will help you think perhaps a little bit more clearly about some things that are very much at the center of life. I love question and answer at the end. I ask you to hold your questions, and we certainly will have time to look through that. I like giving you a sheet of quotations as some of the things it's just you might want to refer back to. A couple of the texts, particularly this fascinating book that you probably haven't seen. I always love introducing people to a great new book, but I shall not linger more now. That will come clear. An Intentional Life Today: Work, Leisure, and the Problem of Time. This lecture really should be most of all about leisure. Why? Because of the trio of very important things mentioned there in the title. It is the most important. It is the one that endures. If you will, you might say it's a little bit like faith, hope, and charity. Time, work, leisure, and the greatest of these is leisure. It is the one that endures unto the next life, whereas time, properly speaking, and work do not. But life is always about putting first things first, as the great Socrates rightly reminds us, which implies putting the other things in the right place too. First things do not show other things to be unimportant. Rather, quite the contrary, they show the true importance of those other things. It's always about order. Everything in God's creation is always about order. And there is no order if there aren't the things that are below the highest, just as surely as there is no king if there are no subjects. My thesis is, when leisure has its proper place as primary in human life, then time and work are ordered to it, and so take on their true nature and meaning. Indeed, then our work and all of our time will come alive. It's my sincere hope that during this lecture, though we focus a bit on time here, perhaps you'll have a little bit of an experience of not having noticed the time as we speak of these things. And if that is the case, then perhaps some of the very truth that we seek to understand will have begun to be illustrated. We have a problem. Philosophy always begins with a problem, and as far as I'm concerned, life is always, in some sense, philosophy being unfolded. What is the problem? Well, first of all, I want to give a word of great hope. There always is an intelligent response. There is no problem that is so serious that there is not a very good and intelligent response, especially, this is the good news for us as Christians. There is no problem we cannot address, even if, in a sense, the problem remains. We still always know, we might say, how to live it. Indeed, by God's providence, there are certain problems that we're not supposed to make go away, but we need to learn how to, as it were, live them rightly. And I think certainly the problem of time is one of those. The problem I wish to articulate then is one that manifests itself in the lower things that we're going to speak of here, in this case, in time. But seeing this problem will lead us back to have to consider the highest thing. I'm going to use the terms here, and this is going to be one of the harder parts of the presentation, and I'm going to invite you to think along with me. I've been thinking about this for some years before I made bold to open my lips in any sort of public way about it, but the terms living time and dead time I have taken from a little-known book. It's by a man named Friedrich Junger. He actually has a more famous older brother. In any case, he wrote this book right before the outbreak of World War II. It is called in English, The Failure of Technology. Very challenging, very appropriate for our times. I'm going to read you a somewhat extended quotation here, and this is the first quotation on the handout. Just as technology has changed our idea of space, making us believe that space has become scarcer, that the earth has shrunk, just so has it changed our idea of time. It has brought about a situation where man no longer has time, where he is destitute of time, where he is hungry for time. I have time, it's almost like a but, and here's this big assertion. I have time when I am not conscious of time, which presses in upon me in its empty quality as lifeless time. He who has leisure thereby disposes of boundless time. He lives in the fullness of time, be he active or at rest. This is what distinguishes him from the man who is merely on leave or on vacation and who therefore can dispose of a limited time only. The technological organization of work no longer permits leisure. It grants to the tired laborer only the meager measure of vacation and spare time that is absolutely necessary to maintain his efficiency. So I'm going to try to clarify these notions of living time and dead time. It's a struggle, but I think it's worth our struggle. You can't define a positive reality simply by denying its privation. You can't say vision is simply being not blind. So we can't say either life is simply being not dead. At the same time, thinking in terms of the privation and certain features of it can focus our attention on certain things we might not have noticed about the positive reality. Thinking about blindness and what clearly is not there can help us appreciate something about what it is to see. Living time is time that is not dead. But what is dead time? Dead time, as surely as a dead body has lost, or in any case lacks, for maybe it never had it in our own experience. It's lost an intrinsic principle of some sort, something that animates it from within. Think of taking my children to the woods. I love them to be able to tell in winter the difference between a dead tree and a living tree. And stand and look what differentiates them, what's missing in this dead tree, and then look back at the living tree and marvel about what is there. There's something missing in our dead time, and of course it's going to help us understand that better if we happen to even know someone who lives, dare I say, in a time right now that is more alive. I suggest that much of our time these days could be called, in varying degrees, dead time. It lacks an animating principle that could and indeed should have been there. Living time has a certain fullness. A sign that our time lacks life is this, and this is what Junger was emphasizing, and he does again and again. we consistently feel pinched for time. It's as though time itself is pressing in on us. It makes us anxious, even breathless. It's not normal to feel that way, and that's one of the most characteristic features of our age. Look around and think about that. You will universally hear people speaking in terms of, oh, yeah, boy, how am I gonna squeeze it all in? Just never enough time. Just give you a quick different image, and then there's the medieval peasant who goes about his way and works very hard. He has no problem of time. Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. One thing only is necessary. I think we can say that Martha wasn't doing anything she should not have been doing, but she was anxious, and that means something was wrong. And of course, the Lord would notice that. She could have been tuned in to the one thing necessary, even while she worked, but she was not. Perhaps she was too focused on her time being more productive, something that you and I surely can relate to. So, Professor Cuddeback, to address the problem of time, you're going to make a spiritual point now using Martha and Mary. One wonders. Just I say, of course. That's exactly what I would like to do. Life always comes back to putting first things first. You mean you're not going to suggest how to save time, you might ask? I respond that it depends on what you mean by save time. Our time needs saving. I grant it. But that's not because we have any shortage of it. Ladies and gentlemen, one thing is certain. You and I have absolutely plenty of time. One way of seeing our problem is that we think when we have a shortage of time, when we have no shortage whatsoever. Let's talk a little bit more about the problem. I'm going to get a little bit philosophical here. If it gets briefly a little the hill gets a little steep, I'm going to ask you just to keep walking with me, and we'll be through it in the blink of an eye. Time we'll have. Never mind. All right. We might have considered a method to make our time more productive. There are many methods for making time more productive. That method, if implemented, might indeed, I suggest, been more part of the problem than the answer. Because honestly, I don't want you to become more productive, or in any case, it's far from my concern at this point. We are not in our age especially suffering from a lack of productivity. The world tells us that if we increase productivity, things will get better, and that, we should have learned by now, is simply not true. We've become an awful lot more productive, at least by some measures in modern times. And we might ask, how has that worked for the quality of life? We could do a sidebar right now, which is fascinating on, at the same time, ironically, paradoxically, we have a problem in certain ways with productivity. We have a big problem, particularly with the younger generation now, people simply having a sense of responsibility and having a work ethic. And the amazing thing is, it's a great instance of put things out of order and you lose everything. We have a society that's hyper-focused on productivity, and in many ways, the younger generation is just saying, we're sick of that. You see this all around you, the younger people, the younger generations looking at kind of the boomer generation saying, no. Whatever that was, we don't want to do that anymore. I suggest there's actually an insight going on there, because it's not about productivity, but indeed now we even have a problem of productivity because people aren't even really getting that kind of sense of responsibility they might have. Once after a Friday visit to the chiropractor, he very kindly said to me, have a productive weekend. You know, it struck me, and that's the problem of having your patient be a philosopher. I kind of looked at him. A productive weekend. Thank you. Okay. I know you mean well by wishing me that. I'm not sure that's what I'm looking for this weekend. Indeed, herein is the trap, I suggest. This is the terms that we're constantly thinking of. But we need to think about the true teleology of time. Teleology is a big word that simply means order to the end. We need to think about what is the true end or fulfillment of time. What is time about? This is a great and perennial question to ask. Indeed, particularly as Christians, we need to ask that, for time, as great as it is, will simply end, in another sense of the word end. And so we particularly should be attuned into what is its true end or purpose. I suggest our overemphasis of productivity and other lesser, if real goods, is what's killing our time. More and more our time is dead, lifeless. Why? Here's my reasoning. Time, says Aristotle, is the measure of change. Time, says Aristotle, is the measure of change, all right? So again, here, this is the kind of most philosophical center point. What we must focus on here then is that time is always a matter of change. Change is always going from here to there. Another way that that's put in the tradition is that change is always going from potentiality to actuality. In actuality, the thing that was changing has come to rest. It's gotten where it was going, and so it stops changing. Think of the fruit tree. Trees are always a great source of insight into very fundamental things in life. The change is not endless. Change is going somewhere, and it's designed such that when it gets where it's going, it comes to rest. So change should always be moving towards some rest, some fullness, some perfection in which that change comes to rest. So we understand motion or change in terms of the perfection, the completion, the fullness that it is moving towards, and again I say, in which it comes to rest. The great art of carpentry is about changing things to build, but to build and then you get to the end of a beautiful house like this, and the work has come to where it was going, and so it stops. A craftsman it's not always about going, it's about getting somewhere. It's about getting somewhere that's worth being. If you turn everything into a business, then you just finish this and you go on to the next, and there's a never end to the cycle. There's something unnatural about that. So it's always important to think in terms of the end. Where is the change going? A key aspect, ladies and gentlemen, of Aristotle and St. Thomas's worldview is that human nature is all about certain actions that are themselves worthy in themselves. They're a kind of perfection. They're a kind of completion. These actions, unlike other kinds of actions, are not themselves changes or a going somewhere. They're actions that are a being somewhere. I'm going to say that again. And I say in all honesty, if this hurts a little bit, I'm going to just encourage you. We can do this. We've got to do this. There's certain actions that are just a going. Changes are always going somewhere. There's certain actions we are designed to do that are not about going somewhere. They're about being somewhere. Gazing into the eyes of the beloved, doing some rich action together just in the presence of one another is not a going. It's a being. It's a being together. This is absolutely critical to understanding their notion of leisure. The actions that are worthy in themselves, the actions that are not going somewhere at all. They're not fundamentally changes. They're about exercising a certain fullness. You say that philosophically by saying they're not a going from potentiality to actuality. They're just, this is actually a very astoundingly powerful phrase. They're just an exercise of actuality. When you are together of a Sunday afternoon and you are reading scripture aloud, you are not going anywhere. You are being somewhere together. You are exercising actuality. This is leisure. And there's something Aristotle directly says, leisure is in a sense outside of time. It brings something of the timeless into time. And in that way, it is able to enliven time. I give you again the first quotation. Don't worry, we're not 1/9, there's 9 quotations. We're not 1/9 the way through the lecture. The first quotation is kind of the whole show, and most of the others are window dressing. The bolded line, he who has leisure thereby disposes of boundless time. He lives in the fullness of time, be he active or at rest. Because these actions are the ultimate end and fulfillment of all other actions, they can bring rich meaning into all those other actions. This is the most exciting, powerful insight. In other words, if you get, we started by saying it's all about order. If you actually get the first things right, you get everything else too. We have lost leisure, and so we have lost work. Joseph Pieper was astounding on this point. If you ever looked at anything of his, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. Our work, this is a very memorable line, our work has become endless. And what he means by it is a double entendre there that's absolutely key. Our work has lost its end, its goal, which is a different kind of thing. Work is wonderful. Work is not leisure. It's the leisure activities of the perfection. So our work has become endless. It's lost its goal, its fruition, that which is for the sake of, then the other sense of the word endless. Because it's lost its goal, that one thing that makes work worth doing and worth stopping doing has been lost. So this is why Joseph Pieper says we live in an age of the tyranny of work. We've lost our real reason to do it. At the same time, we've lost our real reason to ever stop. And so you have people who are addicted to work become workaholics, pardon me. Perhaps a connection. Because they don't have the one thing that would have given it meaning. But if we put leisure in its place, and this was my thesis, if we put leisure in its place and everything else for the sake of it, then we have work that is shot through with meaning. It's hard to give the appropriate image, but again, I'm going to go to something very simple. Perhaps you've seen the Millet painting called the Angelus, where the man and the woman in the field, they've stopped their working and the Angelus bell is working. This is the archetypical peasant, the one that Belloc loves to write of in reverent tones. The peasant is never in a rush. His work is shot through with the deeper meaning that the leisure gives it. And so he works away, never endlessly, but very much for an end. And indeed, at times stopping so as to go into that end, even if most of the hours of his day are his work. This, I say, is what vivifies time from within. Here's what makes the daily course of change be transformed. It makes for living time. Again, not only when we're exercising the higher kind of action, that's when we're most alive, like Mary Magdalene, but also when we're exercising other actions for the sake of those higher actions, like Martha should have been doing. That will be most of us, Martha, with our eyes on the one thing necessary. So now back to our problem. Anything that tends to cut off time or even weaken its connection with what transcends time and gives it fullness of meaning, that's what's deadening it. That's what's killing it. Major source of deadening time, I've already mentioned. There's other ways of putting it. I'm going to say our hyper-focus on productivity, which is connected to our lack of comprehension of the kinds of activities that constitute human flourishing, what we've called leisure. If time is most about productivity, then we're always looking to see what we can squeeze out of our time. Our focus is always on what time produces. This really struck me as I'm finally starting to see Junger's point. If it's most about productivity, you're always just, how do I squeeze a little bit more out of our time? The production is always about something that comes next. It's always about the not now, so we don't live in the present, and we are anxious. I say to you again, we don't live in the present, and so we are anxious. You'll always be anxious if you don't live in the present. Let's contrast that with just a little image of what maybe it could look like. Or at least we have some leisure time. Leisure in Aristotle's sense. Not just not working. Leisure in Aristotle's sense. Activity that has its meaning from within. Activity that's for its own sake. Contemplative time. Time that kisses eternity. Brings something of the unchanging into the changing. Then all of our labor or our work time, not to mention amusement, which is also something different and is not the same as leisure, is given its rule, its measure, its meaning by how it serves that. That leisure time. When leisure has its proper place, then we have the best reason to work. We have the best reason to stop working when it is time to stop working. Another way of stating the conclusion. If your main concern, as that of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle certainly was, is to become a virtuous and a wise person, you're never in a rush. There's nothing about which to be anxious. Fulfill what is necessary. Yes, this can take much, much hard work, but it's never endless. Why? Because it has an end. Our needs are limited. Be as productive as you reasonably should be. Be responsible. Serve others. And keep your eyes and your heart on the things and the actions that matter most. I have just a few suggestions I'm going to make here. A couple suggestions that have to do with leisure more directly, then a couple suggestions about how we might look differently at our work time. The principle at work is always real leisure and good work imbued with leisure. This is living time. This is live time. This is when we will be alive, and indeed we will be alive all the time if we get this right. So we're going to need to be intentional about cultivating a contemplative disposition. A disposition that becomes, in a sense, the governing and overarching disposition in our life. And this is whether you call it the contemplative life or the active life. Contemplatives live this out in most of the hours of their day, but it is the appropriate human disposition to have a contemplative disposition even in our work. That's hard. That's very challenging. I'll make a couple suggestions here. what does that? What do I even mean by that? I'm just going to try to put into words and give you a little bit of an image. It's like, what's this contemplative disposition we're trying to cultivate? Lord, that I might see you and live with you, that I might see my loved ones and live with them in the present. They feel that that's when I'm most alive, is when I'm able to be present with them. That's a contemplative disposition. In a sense, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you, what else is there but being alive with our loved ones in their presence? So how might we cultivate that? Well, obviously, and I'm not the master of it, so I'm just going to say, prioritize the spiritual life. Prioritize the spiritual life. Here, Junger, in quotation number 3, I'm just going to give you, he's not purporting to be a spiritual master, but I just give you the bolded sentence. Leisure to be fruitful, quotation number 3, presupposes a spiritual and mental life from which it draws its meaning and its worth. In otium sine dignitate, leisure without dignity is hollow, empty loafing. Nor is leisure, as many seem to think, a mere intermission work, a limited time. No, by definition, it is unlimited and indivisible, and from it originates all meaningful work. That's central to my thesis. Just wanted to give you that quotation through. But central, of course, is going to be developed in the spiritual life. Let's say some kind of simpler things. It might sound odd. Move slower. So that move more slowly. Stand upright. Raise your eyes to higher things. Smile. I don't mean just out of courtesy smiling at people, but I mean kind of smile at life. Is this corny? I'm suggesting these are ways of cultivating a contemplative disposition. Do not let your life become running to what is next. How many children experience their parents as running to what is next rather than being with? Which means my next suggestion, live in the present and be present. Put it this way, stay here, stay now. Whole sidebar that I'm just going to mention in one word. This is one of the most significant ways to see the problems of our technologies. I've been teaching people the age of a lot of the young people in this room since a lot longer than they've been alive. And one thing that makes me very sad is this aspect, the way that they don't know how, or they're seldom in a context that draws them to be here and now. Their devices are always taking them somewhere else. It undermines the here and the now, but the only place that human life happens is the here and the now. And we're constantly tempted to go away from the only thing that exists in our life, or should be, where always our contact point with reality is the here and the now. So always think in terms of here and now. Live in it. Find ways of being together, especially in the home. To students, where are those places on campus that are like the hearth of the home, where you can exist in the here and the now? That's key to your cultivating a contemplative disposition. I'm going to give you a quotation It's from my father-in-law, and this is the top of the backside. This is quotation number 5. He was a philosopher. He studied with Dietrich von Hildebrand. Towards the end of his life, he said these words, very close to the end of his life, and I wrote this sentence down, and I've never forgotten it. He had no idea I was thinking in these terms, although he did love this book by Friedrich Junger. He's the one who told me about it. The celebration of time is in birth, aging, and death. And I'd just like to suggest there's certain times, especially in our home, where we celebrate birth, we celebrate aging, and in some sense, we celebrate and enter into and mark death. All of these, in a sense, stand out from time. They're the things, in a sense, transcend time, though they are in time. Celebrate birthdays in a Christian way is a great way to develop a contemplative disposition. Students, I say to you, live the intellectual life as though it matters. Good habits, not grades. This is always my mantra to you. Good habits is what you're after, not good grades. By and large, no one cares about your grades. Good habits is what you're looking for. Study as if it matters, because you're forming your soul. A contemplative disposition in your soul, particularly if you're getting a liberal education at a place like Thomas More College. Just a couple quick suggestions for work. Here, I put some quotations on here from Wendell Berry. Give special value and priority to work that lends itself to sharing and to presence, here and now. It's not about agricultural things per se, although the ones that are best at this very often are that there's others too, and we don't have time to go into a bunch of examples. Yes, I slaughter pigs, ladies and gentlemen, because it's a way of being in the here and the now with the people I love. And there's very few things I have ever found that allow me to be present in the here and the now with people, with bodily persons. We're not angels, we're bodily persons. Rich work, often of and in the earth. This connects you to deeper things. It gives you a sense of presence, it gives you a sense of here, and it gives you a sense of now. Be careful in your work, just because, even when no one will notice it. Be the kind of person that simply takes care. And I just give you a couple lines from Wendell Berry here. In quotation number 6, the second of the two little sections in quotation 6 there. Work is the health of love. To last, love must enflesh itself in the materiality of the world, produce food, shelter, warmth, or shade, surround itself with careful acts, well-made things. These things make a difference when we're doing it in view of leisure, in view of a disposition towards the things that endure. And my final suggestion, ladies and gentlemen, is to live Sundays. And if you would just attend to quotation number 8, I was hard to tell you my joy on finding this quotation. I knew I wanted to give you something from John Paul II. And don't skip to the bolded part. It's gonna rock your world. Ready? Here's quotation number 8. Those who have received the grace of faith in the risen Lord cannot fail to grasp the significance of this day of the week with the same deep emotion which led St. Jerome to say, Sunday is the day of the resurrection. It is the day of Christians. It is our day. For Christians, Sunday is the fundamental feast day, established not only to mark the succession of time, but to reveal time's deeper meaning. You know what St. Thomas said about Sunday? He said, Sunday, for one day, you live as though you're in heaven. for what you were made for. That's the gift of Sunday. You live as though you're in heaven. It doesn't matter whether you're an intellectual, you are a peasant, whoever you are. On Sunday, we are all contemplatives. We live the one identity that most sets us apart. We do, by God's commands, what he created us to do. It is a day of rest. Rest from, so that we can rest in the things that matter. And again, as St. John Paul II says, if we do that, it will reveal to us the deeper meaning of time itself. Thanks for your attention. Thank you. All right. Well, I hope I ruffled some feathers or something so that some questions, comments, objections, anything. Yes, sir, please.
Is measure an answer to the problem of time insofar as you have to do certain things in certain times, so we should be blocking it out, so we leave time for leisure, we leave time for Sunday, we leave time for reading to our children, whatever it is. Is measure one of the ways we can try to solve the problem of time?
Great question. Great question. I'm going to say, first of all, in kind of accord with the lines I'm thinking along here, and this is hard because in many ways we want very concrete things, okay, how we're going to kind of solve, and it is a problem, and we do have to take concrete steps. So you're asking the exact right question. But I want to say the first most important thing, I'd say, is not going to be any technique. It's going to be to change our interior disposition, to change our heart, to take on a more contemplative spirit. This is going to help us be not anxious, because our heart will be focused on the unum necessarium to which our Lord referred with Martha, so that even then, if we are very busy, we'll never be anxious. So I just want to emphasize the first thing, I think the first challenge is changing our heart to where your heart is, that's where your treasure is. Where are we putting our heart? Are we developing that contemplative spirit? Okay, now that said, we obviously have to think about how we're going to divide up our day. Now here's a quick thought I'm going to throw at you. We have to be good at scheduling, but I think we have to be careful. Sometimes hyper-scheduling is a kind of micromanaging, and I think I'll say this as kind of a confession. I think that often, particularly this might be a kind of a male thing. We think we're getting ourselves together. We hyper-organize our time, but it actually ends up being a way that we end up blocking out some important things. Like, nope, sorry, I got this meeting. Nope, sorry, I've got these things. And the things that normally tend to make it onto our calendar are the things that are not so much sitting around the fire with the family. Right? How often do we say, nope, sorry, I can't do that because on my calendar is I'm sitting around the fire with the family right now. So I'd say a new approach to scheduling. The funny thing is, someone just gave me a gift of there's a group that has this calendar that's called, it's called the Big A hashtag calendar. Right? But in any case, it's a big calendar that you put on the wall. And then and what they actually encourage you to do is put in the things in there that you wouldn't have normally put on a calendar. This actually brought this to mind. It was just coincidental, but nothing's coincidental. And so now my wife and I are trying to do this of literally putting on our schedule. Okay, we're going to go on this field trip as a family. That's one of the big things that I recommend, and other things like that. So yes, scheduling. But if we're going to do the scheduling thing, the biggest thing I'd say is make sure you schedule the slots for leisure. The funny thing is, though, there has to be, you can't hyper plan everything. So how can we plan it so that it's not hyper planned? I think that's part of the follow up. You got a thought? Go ahead.
Oh, it's just a rule of life. You heard of this concept?
Absolutely, I'm 100% for it.
Well,
Yes.
I'm thinking of the Scholastica Benedict thing, right? So clearly there was a time to break. The rule,
Totally.
the exception proves the rule, right? The fact that Benedict and Scholastica stayed up all night and God sent a thunderstorm and
Well said.
it happened,
Well said.
right? So I guess rule of life, is that something?
Amen. Yes.
as
Yes.
long as it's-
Absolutely. And I just think then, and let's have a approach to this rule of life that recognizes the priority and importance of leisure. Those of us in the active life are not able to spend most of our time doing these leisure. The astounding thing of the goal, I love to stay at my class, look around a room of young people. Some of you stand in awe, might be called to the contemplative life, where your whole day will be ordered around the work of God, the liturgy. Now that is a eschatological sign of what we're all called to do. That's what St. Thomas is saying, is everybody should be thinking in those terms on Sunday. This is why we've got to be not shopping on Sunday, even online, right? Always that constant encroachment. Well, we'll just order it from Amazon on Sunday. We've got to take stronger measures to carve out that space. That's the kind of rule of life thing of to have, and that's what their rule was about, to make sure that you get those things in. Thanks for that. Yes, sir, you had a question.
Yeah, I was a chemical engineer and I was in manufacturing for my whole life.
Wow.
And rose up to running factories. It seems to me that the loss of manufacturing is a huge issue. And this has been a wonderful to hear you speak, because the thing I loved being in manufacturing.
Yeah.
But I loved people. I loved in the workplace over the dangerous chemical reactions. I loved looking at the workers in the eye and telling them they did a good job.
Amen.
And learning it. But I was trying to be Catholic. I was living my Catholic faith on the floor. The spiritual things that take you into leisure were being expressed, were being formed, and I was learning them in my life. Even the matter of a technical problem, getting the team together, getting them focused so that they could talk, so that we could listen to each other, so we could get excited about perfecting that.
Amen.
That it just seems to me that the loss of manufacturing is a huge issue for us.
And manufacturing as more of an expression of what the scholastics would have called a kind of art.
Yes.
There's an art to it. And true arts always are in view of the human.
Right.
And it's never reduced simply to the bottom line, because if you reduce it simply to the bottom line, then you're going to replace them with a machine if it fits your bottom line better, but you're not going to do that.
First thing I would tell them in meetings is, this thing that we come to do is about people.
Amen.
It's about the families that you go home, you earn money to raise families, to educate your kids, to live with your wife and in love. It's
always about people.
That's the work. It's always about people.
And it's harder to do that than we think, particularly when so much is working against us. Who else has a question out there? Yes, please. Thank you, sir.
How would you say we approach, how would you say we change our mentality towards those things, because they do exist, that we gravitate towards just scurrying around and getting done so that we can have the leisure time? Is that a good attitude to have? I mean, but those dishes still have to get washed, the drudgery of flashcards, you still have to do it.
Yep.
You can never really avoid it, even when you do live intentionally and you do put the good leisure in.
Right.
But so would you suggest that we change our mentality towards those things too? And don't just think of it in terms of scurry around and get this done so that then we can go and do the real deal, which is art.
Yes. I like your question. And I love to say to a student, the fact that you've asked the question means you're already 60% there. So way to go. And then it's just a matter of continuing to work it. I give you again the principle. The principles are key. They always apply. Put the first things first, and all else will come into its place. Plato said this all the time. And you know who else said that? Querite primum regnum Dei et omnia alia adicientur vobis. All the put first the kingdom, all these other things are going to come into their place. So the thing I say to you is Martha, Martha, there's one thing that's necessary. Our Lord said this again and again. It's very Aristotelian. That sounds like a joke, but it's not a joke. It's Aristotle saw clearly the nature that this man God is the designer of. You put first things first. So what's my main recommendation to you? Cultivate that interior contemplative disposition. Prioritize the spiritual life, and then bring that spirit to the work that you're doing. This is in a sense what this gentleman is saying, what he was trying to do with his work there. The faith is always first, and it informs, with Aristotle's terms, the kind of the leisure, the activities that have their value in themselves, and then all of these other things, the flashcards, the dishes. God's plan is so astounding. Again, I say, unless there's the lower things, there is no order. For it to be the way God wants it to be, you've got to do the dishes. Do them. There's a reason to do the dishes and to do them well. As Wendell Barrett, there's a reason to take care. The old timers, once in our culture was much more sane. They weren't necessarily philosophical about it, but they had this implicit understanding that you always take care of things. You make the underside beautiful too, just because. If it's about hyperproductivity and the bottom line, you don't make the underside beautiful just because. It's a completely fundamentally different and better approach to work that gives it meaning. It would be very different for those who make homes, and I'm a big one for it's not just a wife that's a homemaker. A husband and wife together are homemakers. They need to make their home together. This is very dignified work in view of the higher things that it serves. Who else had a question? Yes, sir.
I was wondering about the distinction between this, I'm not exactly sure how you described it, but the actions that are actuality themselves. They seem to very much involve other people, like being present with the beloved, this kind of thing. But you also indicated it's distinct from amusement. These are things I think of that take us out of time. Playing music together. People talk about playing sports. Slaughtering a pig, apparently. I've never done that, but it might fall into this category.
Next week.
But I'd love to come see it. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how do you distinguish from amusement?
You invited me back to give another lecture, is what you're doing. That's what this gentleman just did. Amusement are actions that are more of a diversion. They're a lower kind of thing. And a key point in the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle says, could amusement, fun, possibly be the end of man? He says it would be strange if you worked hard your whole life so as at the end to be able to amuse yourself. It's a beautiful point. And he says there, amusement isn't serious enough to be the goal of life. So the things that we call amusements are more of a diversion. There's a great story told of John the Evangelist where someone said, well, why are you stroking the cat if life is so serious about contemplation? And the legend is that John the Evangelist said, sometimes you have to loosen the bow. Amusement is the loosening of the bow. It's a roller coaster ride. It's doing something fun that still maybe has a little bit of worthiness to it. But then the leisure is the things that have that much greater richness. Although I love to say, and when you talk about home, and this is so important, we talk about this stuff now, like on a Sunday afternoon, good amusement can shade into leisure. This is part of the art. Like that good family game. Is it amusement or leisure? A good family game can start to shade from amusement into leisure. Always bearing in mind the distinction. And then there's some things, remember, once you've made a distinction, sometimes it's not exactly clear. Something might kind of ride on the edge of it. There's a number of activities in a healthy home that ride on the edge of amusement and leisure, and that's good. That means something's going well. Some things are obviously the full-on leisure. If you're singing the psalms together, this is full-on leisure. But that reading a story aloud, that's kind of a funny story, but then it takes this serious turn, and then and you stop, and there's silence in the room, and everyone's just kind of together, and the fire's crackling. This is not amusement. There's something much richer that's happening right now. And it's these kind of things. I almost want to talk about scheduling. Maybe it's that in a slightly crazy age, those of us who are parents might have to take the hit of becoming more of a scheduler to set up for our children so that maybe they have a little bit of experience of a timelessness. They didn't know we were arranging and scheduling this. For them, it seemed very natural. May our homes succeed in being more that way. Just pull the plug on me when you want to. Who else had a question? Yes, please.
So at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that some actions are natural to human nature, and those are like the leisurely actions of bringing of things into actuality. The being, can you just kind of elaborate on like what some of those actions could be? So you mentioned like the spiritual life or like praying or singing.
Yeah, and yes, those are good examples. And here I'm going to go Aristotle, and it's because, remember, God teaches us through nature. St. Thomas thought that Aristotle was a great teacher of seeing what nature says. It's not about Aristotle, it's about what God is teaching us by nature. There's so much in the Nicomachean Ethics. Virtue, this sounds like a throwaway line. This is one of the most beautiful things I could ever say. Ready? Virtue is the perfection of human nature. It's you having grown into what you were designed to be. So picture when you've become disciplined, when you've become patient, when you've become chaste. These are human nature showing itself at its truest. So virtuous actions, I love to put it this way, it's you having become most you. And this is what in marriage becomes most, people who really know one another and really love one another, and also of parents towards children. They see, may someone see you in this way, that they see the virtue that will be the truest you when you do it one day. And that's what I mean by it's natural to you. Even you as an individual. There's a you as an individual when you're virtuous. That's going to be what God designed you to be at your full flourishing. It's essentially the same as what I will look like if I do that. But it's different individually. That's the point. And that is the various virtues. There is nothing more natural to human beings than being virtuous. It's much more natural to be chaste than to be intemperate, even if intemperance comes easier. But I think I feel a cane taking me this way. So thank you very much. Thank you.